Welcome to the Roy Morgan Risk Labs December 2025 quarterly update. Soon I'll reveal the latest and much anticipated rankings of Australia's most trusted and most distrusted brands. And later, we'll conduct a deep dive into regulations, looking at the relationship between the degree to which different industries are regulated and the impact on the public's trust. And more importantly, distrust. But first, we have breaking news. In the single month of December, Optus was the most distrusted brand in Australia. This follows the nationwide 000 outage in September, but more on Optus shortly. Before we get to the data, let's be clear about definitions. Trust is not just someone liking a brand. It's the earned expectation that a brand will do the right thing even when no one's watching. Distrust, on the other hand, is not simply no trust. It's an active suspicion that a brand will put itself first when it matters most. Now that distinction is critical because distrust is far more damaging and volatile than just a lack of trust. And this is where it's useful to separate two ideas that often get blurred. No trust and distrust are not the same thing. No trust is passive, but distrust is shatteringly active. Customers turn into activists. They complain, they tell their friends, and swamp social media, and they switch to a competitor. Once distrust sets in, everything becomes harder. Distrusters are less patient, less forgiving, and more likely to assume the worst when something just doesn't feel right. And that's why toxic distrust does so much damage. It doesn't just slow growth, it makes recovery longer, more expensive, and far less predictable. The real problem isn't that distrust is invisible. It's that most brands and trust tracking don't look for it. Companies measure who is still buying, who's still engaged, and still answering surveys. So leaders end up with a blindly comforting picture of trust, while distrust is escalating just outside the frame. And by the time it shows up in sales, churn, or reputation, it's too late. It's already embedded and much harder to reverse. So how widespread is distrust? Since 2020, Australians have been more distrusting than trusting, and it doesn't look like changing anytime soon. The cost of living crisis entrenched net distrust. You can see from the black line that we're deep in net distrust territory. Trust in green has improved slightly, but distrust in red is the immovable problem. This is the new baseline. Significantly more Australians distrust brands and institutions than trust them. This is a profound shift in national sentiment. This chart shows where each industry now sits on the trust-distrust spectrum. Retail and consumer products on the left remain the most trusted sectors, while telecommunications, social media and government-related services continue to anchor the red distrust end of the scale. There are signs of recovery in supermarkets, which have climbed 5 places as distrust in Coles and Woolworths eases. Banking has also strengthened, moving into the top 4 most trusted industries. Insurance has edged up as privacy concerns and affordability criticisms soften, but more than half of industries are still in net distrust territory. The structured risk in Australia has not disappeared. It has simply shifted. In the next section, we'll explore the latest rankings of Australia's most trusted and distrusted brands and take a closer look at how key players are performing and where they stand in the ever-changing landscape of social attitudes and opinions. Starting then with the nation's 20 most trusted brands. Bunnings remains Australia's most trusted brand, and notably, the top 3 are unchanged: Bunnings, Aldi and Kmart. These brands represent value, reliability and practical usefulness, exactly what Australians prioritise in uncertain times. What's also interesting is the presence of 3 major banks back in the top 20. Commonwealth Bank, National Australia Bank and Westpac, all strengthening, suggesting key parts of the banking sector have recovered from the Financial Services Royal Commission. But even here, it's important to remember no brand is universally trusted. Almost every one of these brands attracts some level of distrust. Trust builds resilience, but it doesn't eliminate risk. Outside the top 20, the real story is volatility. Steam, one of the world's largest PC gaming platforms, surged 28 places. Now that's not marginal movement, that's reputational acceleration. UE and UniSuper also record double-digit jumps. So what's happening with the most distrusted brands? Woolworths remains Australia's most distrusted brand, a striking contrast given it was the most trusted just a couple of years ago. That reminds us that trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback. Optus emerged as the second most distrusted brand following the fatal 000 outage, another reminder of how quickly operational failure can convert into reputational damage. As I announced earlier, in the single month of December, Optus was the nation's most distrusted brand. Now, perennially distrusted Facebook remains entrenched in 3rd place, while Coles breaks away from Woolworths as its distrust eases. The broader point, it's easy to land on this list, but it's hard to escape it. Outside that top 20, Microsoft deteriorated by 37 rankings. That's not drift, it's a rupture. For a legacy enterprise technology brand to deteriorate so sharply suggests confidence in institutional competence is weakening. When backbone infrastructure brands start slipping, it signals unease about reliability and accountability. OpenAI, landing in 26th place, up 17 places, is even more revealing. On the topic of AI, our view is that it's going to taint normally trusted brands. Just look at Microsoft. Stay tuned for our AI Distrust webinar in late May. Next, we'll take a deep dive into the impact of the regulatory system on trust and distrust. Our data reveals a remarkable relationship between highly regulated industries and trust. The finance sector, for example, provide clear evidence that greater regulation and stricter rules have helped shape public perception for the better. Across financial services, many of the current regulations emerged from the Royal Commission. On the flip side, sectors like telcos and supermarkets have relatively low regulation and suffer deep distrust. They currently face severe regulatory headwinds as the public demands better accountability and a fair go. Let's take a closer look then at the financial sectors. First, the banking sector. Prior to and following the Royal Commission, the banking industry faced significant scrutiny, with the majority of respondents nominating banks as being profit-driven and unethical. In December 2020, the Royal Commission legislation was passed by Parliament and several new regulations took effect, including granting ASIC stronger powers to ensure compliance with industry codes. In September 2023, the final introduction of regulatory reforms had a profound impact on the whole finance sector, especially the banking industry. The consequence? Distrust declined and trust improved so significantly that within 2 years the entire banking sector had moved back into net trust territory. Following the final recommendations in September 23, more Australians began to perceive the banking industry, predominantly the Big Four banks, to be customer-centric, reliable and accountable for their actions. And fewer Australians cited the banking industry as profit-driven and unethical. It's interesting to note that opinions are divided on service as a reason for trust or distrust in the banking industry, suggesting room for further improvement. Now, to superannuation and wealth management. Sort of similar to the banking industry, the superannuation and wealth management sectors also saw distrust decline and trust increase following the new regulations taking effect in September 23. Interestingly, these sectors recovered back into net trust territory earlier than the banks. Let's move now to payments, cards and loans. Although the payments, cards and loans followed a similar recovery pattern to banking, superannuation and wealth management, with distrust declines and trust increases following the Royal Commission regulatory reforms, scandals involving individual brands, such as Latitude Finance's data breach, disrupt this trend. We repeatedly see that new scandals trigger bad memories of a brand, or even an entire sector. This is known as a reactivation loop, and that's precisely what happened here. Our final sector in the finance industry is insurance. The insurance industry also followed that familiar trend, that is, until late 2022, with the Medibank and General Insurance broken promises scandals. Once again, individual scandals simmer in the subconscious, waiting for a new trigger to surface them. And every time that happens, it overshadows the benefits of the new regulations, highlighting how quickly trust can be lost and how long it takes to rebuild. Now for a completely different sector, telecommunications. The default reputational home for the telecommunications industry is deep in distrust territory, and the September 2022 Optus cyber attack affecting 9.8 million Australians just made it worse. The regulators quickly took matters into their own hands, amending the telecommunications regulations to better protect privacy, and launched an investigation following the November 2023 outage. Now to a sector that's under serious threat of stronger regulatory controls: supermarkets. Supermarkets have historically been trusted. However, negative perceptions of being profit-driven and unethical behaviour during the cost of living crisis have driven the industry deep into distrust territory. More accurately, Coles and Woolworths have driven the sector into the distrust zone. When the sector was trusted, there was little or no cause for regulatory reform. But now, with so much community distrust, the government is evaluating stricter regulations recommended by the ACCC. Despite a modest recovery in the net score from its March low, supermarkets remain in distrust territory. What's changed is not operational reliability, it's perceived fairness. Yes, more Australians are nominating fair prices and reliability as reasons for trust, but the scale difference is striking. Mentions of unaffordable prices nearly doubled between January and March and remain materially elevated. Profit motivation and dishonesty have also risen sharply. The key insight is this: trust drivers are incremental. Affordability and reliability move gradually. Distrust drivers are exponential. Price hikes and perceived profiteering spike quickly and at scale. In a cost of living economy, pricing is no longer transactional, it's moral. And once pricing becomes moralised, regulation enters the distrust conversation. Now to a heavily regulated industry sector that's bucking the trust trend. The gambling industry has been in persistent net distrust since we began tracking it. Unlike banking or superannuation, regulatory intervention has not restored trust. It has merely reduced the intensity of distrust. You can see the pattern clearly. Following the Royal Commission into Crown and subsequent regulatory escalation, the establishment of the VGCCC credit card bans and enforcement action, distrust moderates, but it never crosses into trust territory. This is the deep distinction. Regulation can correct behaviour, but it cannot legitimise the underlying business model. Gambling is not distrusted because it's insufficiently regulated. It's distrusted because many Australians question the morality of the activity itself. And that's why this sector bucks the broader trend in the regulation-trust relationship. Compliance can reduce harm, but it can't manufacture moral acceptance. And that's a wrap.